Welcome to the number one show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. Hey, welcome back to the show, and wow, is this an exciting one. We got the great, the inspiring Bill George. Many of you know him as the former CEO and chairman of Medtronic, and I'm going to give a little bit more on his background in a moment. But first, I want to start off by saying thank you to a fantastic sponsor. Now, I don't have a lot of sponsors on this show for a good reason, because I can only plug companies who I genuinely believe not only provide a valuable product or service, but can actually do something that's going to elevate the game in medtech. And so that company is called Clary. The best way to put it in terms of what they do is that they're going to help you hit your number no matter what. They've worked with a variety of healthcare and life science companies to boost their commercial productivity by about 80%. So what does that exactly mean? And what do they do? Well, before I kind of give you the general description of what they do, here's how I like to describe it. For those of you who have Salesforce, have any of you ever said, man, I hit my number this year or this quarter because of Salesforce? Thank God for Salesforce. No, because we all adopted Salesforce at one point thinking it's going to do something magical, and it's not. No offense to Salesforce, it's a great platform, right? But that's just not what it's meant to do, right? What Clary is, it's a leading revenue platform for C-suite leaders, sales and marketing, and customer success teams. And essentially, it sits on top of your CRM. So it gives you complete visibility into sales activities such as email, calendar, and commercial data. And the result of it is that it's going to help you improve the value of your CRM and your sales effectiveness. And the ultimate goal here is to drive predictable execution across teams to really and truly run revenue. And you've heard me say time and time again, if you have business results, right, you have certain objectives that are going to be mapped to those business results. But at the end of the day, the only thing that you really control is your activity, right? We're not data-driven enough in this industry about that. And partly because we can't get the value out of our own CRMs. Clary is the thing that's going to solve for that. For me, I first discovered them because they have a lot of fantastic leaders over there, such as Devin Reed, who is just such a strategist when it comes to how to use content to drive revenue and grow pipeline. But again, some other people who I've discovered, like David Campbell, Tyler Pleiss, really a lot of their team, I get a lot out of their content on LinkedIn. So I highly recommend giving them a follow. But more importantly, go sit in on their demo. You're going to learn a lot just from that demo. And so check the show notes below. It's going to click over to their website. It will give you more insight as into what they do. But more importantly, what I recommend is don't mess around. Go ahead and just click the button that says See Clary in Action and book that demo, because you're going to get a lot of insights and education about how you start thinking about this. And whether you're a medical device sales manager or director or VP, this is the way our industry is going. This is the way it has to go, which is more data-driven processes and, more importantly, managing those activities across streams to drive execution, drive commercial excellence, and more importantly, be able to run revenue. So click that link below. Go ahead and do it right now. And now, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. So Bill George. Bill George is the former CEO and chair of Medtronic, and he's the executive fellow at Harvard Business School, where he's taught leadership to MBAs and executives since 2004. He's the author of 4 best-selling books: Authentic Leadership, True North, Finding Your True North, and 7 Lessons for Leading in Crisis. True North was actually listed as one of the top 25 best leadership books of all time, and he served on the boards of Goldman Sachs, Mayo Clinic, ExxonMobil, Novartis, and Target. Now, his latest book, True North Emerging Leader Edition, is not a book you read. It is a book you study. I highly recommend you get it. And so in this episode, we cover a variety of different topics, whether you're a new sales rep or a marketing manager or even a VP or an executive. If you want to learn how to develop yourself and find your true north, this is the framework that you're going to want to look into. And the other exciting part is that since it's a in-depth episode, we have a couple of breaks in the episode you're really going to enjoy where we cover a specific case study from Clary and their VP who oversees their life sciences department, Andy Cesario. So with that being said, let's get right into the show. So here's my interview with Bill George. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of the State of MedTech. And for those of you who are really into reading and books and essentially knowledge, you might be listening to this on my other podcast called Mindloom with Omar and Khateeb. I have a great guest today, somebody that, I've been following actually his work for quite a long time on LinkedIn. As he's been in academia, specifically over at Harvard, writing a lot about leadership, and that's Bill George. Bill, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to have a lot of fun on this show. And so, for the audience that might be new to you, what a lot of people do know you as is the former CEO of Medtronic. You served at Medtronic for 13 years, I think from the late 80s into the 90s and 2000s, right? A lot of big things happened at Medtronic during that time, I believe. Acquisitions of like Software Danik. I'm not sure if Covidien was under your watch, but those are big. Essentially when Medtronic was, I think at one point almost bankrupt prior to that. And those were the years that Medtronic became Medtronic. So we have a lot of lessons from there. But in general, before we jump into your book, which I have it here, in a quick, 1-2 minute high level, who is Bill George?
Well, I'm just a kid that comes out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm the only child of older parents. My father wanted me to make up for his failures. So at 9 years old, he pulled me aside and said, son, I'd like you to make up for my failures. I'd like you to become the leader I never became. And here are some companies I think it would be great if you could be CEO of. One is a company I hold stock in since 1937 down in Atlanta called Coca-Cola. Another one up in Cincinnati called Procter & Gamble. And there's a new little computer company in New York called IBM. You should try to be ahead of one of these companies. I actually did work for all three of them for the summer. But anyway, they're all great companies. But I was the kid that lost 7 elections in a row in high school and college because I was trying too hard to become a leader, which I wasn't. And I had a lot to learn. And some people pulled me aside at Georgia Tech and said, Bill, no one's ever going to want to work with you, much less be led by you, because you're moving so fast to get ahead. You don't take time for other people. And they were spot on. I hadn't really learned leadership's all about relationships. And I had to learn that lesson the hard way. But at least I learned it early. And but I made a very important career decision because I was on track to be head of a major company called Honeywell. It was then Minneapolis Honeywell. And I had had a fabulous experience in Brussels for 3 years, leading Honeywell Middle East, Europe, and Africa. And that was great. And I came back and got thrown into a series of turnarounds. And every time I'd get one of them turned around, they give me 9 divisions to turn around, and then another 6, and then another 9. And one day I looked at myself and I said, is this how I want to spend my life? This is a huge bureaucracy. I'm just chasing numbers. I love to be out with people, employees. And so I had turned Medtronic down 3 times to be president, chief operating officer, number 2 job. And I called Win Wall, the CEO, back, and I said, Win, is that job that I turned down a few months ago still open? He said, well, we're about ready to fill it, but you can get in line if you want. Well, 4 or 5 months later, I walked into Medtronic as the new president, chief operating officer, much smaller company than about $750 million in sales. But it was the best decision I ever made in my life because it was where I needed to be. It was the mission and values. And I want to stress that because at Honeywell, the mission was making money, just like General Electric. And I know how to do that, but that's not how I want to spend my life. And Medtronic, it was restoring people to full life and health, extending life, alleviating pain, and restoring health. And wow, that was a powerful mission. And everyone at Medtronic talked about it all the time, talked about the values. And so it was just a great experience that I had there for 13 years. I put a 10-year limit on being CEO because in those days, I felt CEOs like Jack Welch were staying too long. And so I felt a high-tech company like Medtronic needs a new CEO every decade. And that did free me up to go off and decide what I want to do next. And it turned out to be in the teaching area. After a year and a half in Switzerland, teaching at 2 institutions, I got asked to come back to my alma mater, MBA alma mater, Harvard Business School, and I've been teaching there until very recently. I still am, but I'm now an executive fellow. So not quite as much as I was.
I got to tell you, for a man with your career and life story, that's probably the most efficient 2-minute tell me about yourself I've ever heard. And wow, like what a lot of pressure to have as a 9-year-old. Be like, hey, here are 3 companies you should probably try to be a CEO of. I think it worked out pretty well because you went to a company of that same caliber, but in the MedTech world. And at least for me, I'm very proud of the industry we're in because, no offense to these other companies, but we deal with technologies that are actually going to save lives, right, and make a difference, And so I think it's incredibly important. So let's.
Omar, if I just interrupt you.
Oh, please.
If I go down and talk to people in the labs at Medtronic, which I spent a lot of time in the labs, or I go down to the production line, talk to or sit at lunch with a group of women who are working on the production line, and say, we need your help. We need to make $3.91 a share this year, and we're falling a little bit short. Can you help? They look at me and they say, that's not my job. My job is to produce a quality product. My job is to come up with an innovation, a breakthrough innovation can save someone's life. And so it's a whole different orientation, I think. And today, I think a lot of companies have lost sight of that. I think it's so important that MedTech, we are saving lives and we're restoring people to full health. And that's a pretty cool thing.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. So let's dive in. There's a lot we can talk about, but a lot of it's going to be kind of centered around your book. So I have it here. I actually purchased and read. As you know, I sit here in a big library of mine that I'm very proud of. So I've read a lot of books on self-development and leadership, and they're all, I have to be honest with you, they're kind of all the same flavor. So when I first purchased the book, I was like, all right, really well-known, accomplished CEO writes a book on leadership. Let's see what this is about. And I have to tell you, I was really impressed with it. And there's there's a lot that I have to add, to talk about here. The first thing I want to mention for the listeners of mine is to purchase this book. Okay, I'm going to leave this in the show notes. And more importantly, here's when not to purchase this book, which is to wait for you to get into a leadership position. We have a lot of execs who listen to this. If you're in a leadership position, buy this book. The time to buy this book is not to say when I get to that position. This is the kind of book that is foundational. And I always have the saying, which is around the habits of the mind. Habits of the mind are like chains. They're too weak to be felt until one day they're going to be too strong to be broken. And this is not a book to read. This is a book to be studied. And so for those who are associates, managers, directors, buy this book and sit down on your butt every week and work through it. There's going to be exercise in it. There's going to be questions you have to reflect on. This is not something you just skim through and throw it up on the shelf and be like, oh yeah, I'm good. This is, it's going to take a lot of studying and application. And so I just want to encourage that, including the clinicians who are listening to this as well. As I mentioned at the beginning of the intro of this podcast, we're going to make this podcast episode a CME eligible event. So for those clinicians, be sure to click the link below and go write what you learned from this, quick 30 seconds. But again, whether you lead a small private practice or you're looking for a management position in a hospital, buy this book and study and work through it. So that being said, let's start out with the first question, which is, you wrote this book already, Bill. Why did the world need a emerging leader edition? Like, why an update? And this was just published, I think, in 2022. So why did the world need an updated version of this?
Yeah, and I've been resisting calling it an update because it's about 75% new content. Yes, we use, you have certain.
Hold on. I gotta just highlight that it's 75% new content, which is music to my ears, because as a former medical student, all these publishers come up with a quote unquote new edition with 10 new pages, and then they charge an extra $100. So there's 75% new content. All right. So it's practically a new book then. Why?
The world has changed. We wrote True and North back in 2000. Look, the concepts there of leadership, you don't come up with all new ideas on leadership. I'd be a fraud if I did that. Some people try, by the way, but I think it's.
Yeah, I've read those books, unfortunately.
Leadership has changed dramatically, and I think it's time for a new generation. I really believe we've got to move beyond the baby boomers who have been chasing maximizing shareholder value, and move to a real deep sense of purpose, to much more inclusive organizations where people feel a sense of belonging, and really are understand who they are. And I love the way that's the best description I've heard of the book. But yeah, it is a book to be studied because it's hard work to figure out who you are. Everyone says, oh, I know who I am. Actually, they don't. And a lot of people charge out and try to go lead organizations before they figure out who they are and why they're doing it. And what's your why? What's your purpose? Because why would I want to follow you if you don't have a clarity of purpose? So I think that's why I wrote the book.
Oh, 100%. And one of the things you wrote in the book, again, in my eyes, a good nonfiction book today in business is one that's not only going to give you, a path, but as you're reading it, the stories that are told are going to be things that sort of flip a light switch on. I think the best books out there, what they do is, you're in a dark room and you're feeling around on the walls, and that book guides your hand to turn on a switch that's always been there. And once the lights turn on, you see art, you see sculptures, you see tools, you see things that have always been there. You just did not know. And I feel like that book is one of those things. One of the sentences you had written in this book about leading yourself is that, you cannot lead others unless you can lead yourself, which everybody has heard that. But to take it further, me as a small business owner, I don't have a team. And so there are days that I am going through a lot of stress. I'm under a lot of pressure. I'm not happy. And what does not help is if I wake up and I tell myself, oh, you're being lazy. Oh, you're worthless. Or you're doing a bad job, because that doesn't make me perform better. So I feel like the best leaders have mastered the ability to understand who they are, their strengths and weaknesses, and find a way to get themselves to do the things they don't want to do, but to do it enthusiastically and do more of it. And then they translate that to other people. Is that correct in what I just said?
Yeah, it's beautifully said. And you mentioned strengths and weaknesses. I failed weakness training for correction for 2 decades in 2 previous companies at Litton and Honeywell because they wanted to pick up weaknesses. But I find out a lot of times your strengths and weaknesses are 2 sides of the same coin. Like for instance, I get a lot of things done. I keep a lot of balls up in the air and keep 50 balls up in the air at the same time. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But the weakness is I'm very impatient. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, and if I get under too much stress, I just get very impatient with people and say, look, we got to get this done. And so that brings out the worst. So I think one has to learn how to play to your strengths and ameliorate your weaknesses. And so, look, if you don't like finance, hire a good finance person. Don't try to be a financial. If you're a medical doctor, be a medical doctor, and then hire a partner who is a good finance person to do all the administrative stuff. And I think that's, you can't learn to do all those things, and we can't be everything. I could never be a medical doctor, much as I admire doctors.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's funny. And I see this is the magic of not only the podcast platform, but books, is that they kind of lead you to the same ideas. I always believe that there's no such thing as a unique idea. Like, you don't have ideas have you. So this is a great segue into one of the chapters that I personally really enjoyed a lot, which is about crucibles. But, one thing I was going to ask you, Bill, is that do you feel that people, not just leaders, people in the business world don't do a good enough job of understanding their weaknesses and embracing them and leveraging them? Like, are weaknesses things to be corrected or to be understood?
Quick commercial break and trick questions. Weaknesses are to be understood and corrected in a sales organization. That's why in this quick commercial break, we're actually going to do a mini podcast. These are 2 quick 5-minute interviews, one now, one later in this episode, with the VP of Strategic Industries at Clary, that's Anthony Cesario, who's going to go into the 4 stages of digital sales maturity. If you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify, you're in for a treat because he's going to actually show a screen share and walk you through some fantastic stages with a lot of details in them. If you're listening to this on any other platform, I apologize, but if you want to see it, go to YouTube or Spotify. And I just want to remind you, after you listen to this, if you haven't taken action on it now, don't drag your feet about it, sales leaders. Go ahead and click that link in the show notes below. Go and book time with Clary's healthcare team so you can understand digital sales maturity and actually understand what it takes to run revenue through predictable and data-driven strategies using Claire's platform. Whether you decide to use them or not is not the point. You'll get a lot in that demo the way I did, and that's why I invited them to be a sponsor of this episode. So be sure to check the show notes below and click that link. Now let's get into that quick interview with Anthony Cesario. All right. Hey, Anthony, thank you so much for spending some time with us to kind of walk us through this. Now, from my understanding and from what I can, tell from the work that I've seen with Clary, you've had the opportunity to sit down and work with sales leaders and commercial executives at some of the top companies on planet Earth who are all implementing and getting the most out of their sales force. What are some best practices? Because this is a huge investment, and a lot of sales teams invest in Salesforce expecting it to be a magic wand, and it turns out not to be. So what's your recommendations for people? And I believe you have even a framework for those who are watching on Spotify and YouTube to kind of watch through.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Omar. Great question. To be fair, I would say, we do have kind of the distinct pleasure to work with some of the top go-to-market teams across the planet that have, I would say, that are getting the most out of their technology investments for their sales teams. But we do get to work with a lot of companies that are on different levels of that maturity curve, right? From folks that are a few years into their Salesforce deployment and trying to figure out, like, how do I even get my reps to use it, to teams that are trying to get more leverage out of maybe the adoption they have today. So we've kind of, over the last decade, we've had a chance to see a lot of different companies and how they're, how they have to make changes to go optimize their use of technology for the sales teams. So maybe we'll start at like the foundational level. I'll pull up a little visual here to help kind of bring this along. When you think about establishing what we would call digital sales maturity, right? Meaning there are technologies that are supporting your team's ability to sell. There's a couple different stages that we kind of think that you have to go through, and you don't really skip over stages in this process. You have to get these early ones right. So the first thing, right? Let's call stage 0. I bought a CRM for my sales org, right? If that's stage 0, right? We've committed as a company to have a platform to help us sell better with data, with the help of automation, things like this. Stage 1 would be, how do we establish credibility around this investment, right? So credibility in a few different definitions, or a few different ways we can talk about credibility. The first is data, right? Do we even trust what we see inside the CRM? Do the reps trust what they see? Do the managers and folks who have to make sense of this data, do they actually trust that what they see is real? If not, you get the old garbage in, garbage out kind of scenario, right? Where a lot of effort goes into trying to put data in here, but if you don't trust what you see, everything else from there, through the BI that you're putting on top of all this and everything else you're doing to like make sense of this data, doesn't matter if you don't trust it. So that's the first question, right? Do we have trust in the data? And then the second is, have we established credibility with the people that are actually using the software, right? And so at this stage 1, that's really about the rep. It starts with them. If your sellers, right, whether you're a medical device rep or, a biotech rep or whoever that is, if your sellers do not see this investment that you've made as a value add to them, if it actually feels like it makes their life harder than easier, you're in a tough spot. Because every time they go to log into this platform, it's just, how do I do the least amount of work possible, because this isn't for me, it's for somebody else, right? And so that's the first thing, right? I would call stage 1 credibility. Is this a credible investment we've made with the users that we're asking to use it every day? And is the data that's inside of here trustworthy? That's step 1.
It feels like a lot of, I was going to say, it feels like a lot of companies, and from my experience, and a lot of reps and sales leaders would agree, it sounds like, I feel like a lot of med device companies, they stumble in stage 1, which is why these later stages you're going to talk about, they never even get to, because establishing the credibility is so important. And a lot of times when reps, they deal with Salesforce, they feel like, oh, this is a tool for marketing just to keep tabs on what we're doing. It doesn't help them doesn't help them sell more. I've never heard a med device rep ever saying, I hit my number this quarter. Thank God for Salesforce,
Yeah, we hear that all the time, right? You wouldn't be surprised, but we're constantly surprised when we talk to reps and they say, I use Salesforce to update the close date on like my opportunity and manage the contacts that I have to reach out to. And that's it. Like, that's all my boss really, holds me accountable to. And that's actually like a really important part of the conversation. I'm under NDA, I won't say names, but we're working with one of the top robotic surgical teams on the planet right now. And you'd be surprised. You would think this company probably is the most innovative sales team in all of med device and things like that. And their capital reps literally don't log into the Salesforce. They've spent millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars on Salesforce for the past 5 years. And their capital reps literally say, nothing in it for me. They send their pipeline updates to their bosses over email, over text, right? They're literally not using this, call it 30, 40, $50 million investment they made as a company, which is pretty wild. And so that's the other side of this coin, right? Because when you think about why you actually bought a platform like Salesforce, because Salesforce is a great platform, it's less about like, we just want to be a credible system, right? You're actually trying to get leverage out of that, right? So when you think about stage 2 here, it's how do we actually improve the rigor of our sales organization, because we have data that we have access to now that we didn't have before, that we can trust and make decisions on. And so you start thinking about, how do we leverage this data now to improve win rates, to be more efficient, to build better territories, to build more repeatable selling motions, right? Like that's the promise that is Salesforce, that is a CRM, that is, digital selling, not just writing stuff down on paper or in a spreadsheet or what have you. And the challenge is, to your point, Omar, many medical device sales teams are still just trying to establish credibility. Even though the reason they likely bought the platform is because they thought they would get more leverage out of it to improve rigor and execution. And so it's a big challenge, man. It really, really is. And when you don't have this second piece, like, this is what managers care about more, right? They want to be able to run a more, effective sales org. When they don't feel like they're getting value out of Clarity, they're not going to hold the reps accountable to update the data and things like that. And so now you have the two key personas here, the reps and the managers, really not bought in. And then you see the third persona here, or the role enablement or commercial excellence or whatever that team is. They're trying to drive adoption of the platform, right? They're trying to get people to use it, while the reps and the managers feel like it's not for them. They don't trust what they see. So it's just really interesting.
It's just more like, for the reps and managers, a lot of times, and at least for me, I'm a startup guy. A lot of times the enablement was marketing. For reps and managers, they just see this as, this is more work, less time selling, and this doesn't help me close more deals. So why even do it?
100%. Yeah. And here's the thing, man. When you think about how long people have been trying to get this right, most of the companies we talk to, even, enterprise med device companies who maybe been on Salesforce or CRM for the better part of a decade, compared to maybe some smaller companies that have just, rolled it out over the last couple of years. You can be 5 years in, 7, 8 years in, and still not have credibility with the users of the product. Like, that's a big investment you've made. You're spending a lot of, OpEx, operating expenses, to pay for this system, to have the primary users of it feel like it's not valuable. And so, you see at Clary, we talk about a concept called revenue leak. We think, what revenue leak is, it's the idea that there is revenue being left on the table because of inefficiencies happening in the processes that you use to generate revenue. And so there's a lot of there's a pretty massive impact on the potential revenue a company can bring in by not getting the most out of these investments. So that's kind of how we think about digital sales maturity at Clary, and this is where most of these most companies fall into these first couple stages. As you can imagine, over here to the right, there is actually more stages. Like, when you start to get sales rigor in place, then you could start getting to.
All right, so Anthony will cover stages 3 and 4 later in this episode. Let's get back to our interview with Bill George.
Like, are weaknesses things to be corrected or to be understood?
I think it's be understood. But let's go to crucibles because was the most controversial part of the book. I think it's the most significant part of it.
I
It's the one
agree.
everyone has to do it. I was told by we went to a leadership conference. We got all leadership scholars at Harvard from all over the country and all over the world into Harvard. And that's one thing they said, do not address this. Just think about the positive things in your life. When were you most successful? Who was
Yeah,
your
you learn
greatest?
nothing. You learn nothing from that stuff, though, right?
Exactly. And
You know,
so the crucibles that you really have to go there, and people say, I never had one. Actually, you have.
and
Do you
can you define
understand the
it
impact?
for the audience? Can you define crucible?
A crucible is that time in your life when you're facing really a difficult challenge and all the pretense is stripped away. Maybe you got fired from your job. Maybe you got divorced. Maybe you just felt like you're in the wrong field and I got to change careers. Or maybe younger in life, it's as simple as being rejected by a girlfriend.
Mm.
Or maybe your parents got divorced. It's these things, and oftentimes they're young things in life. Maybe you had a dominant father, and so right now, every time you see a dominant person coming, you shrink up or you try to
Uh,
overcompensate. And so I think it's understanding those things and how they impact your life. And once you do, you can turn them into what we call a pearl. Now I get these ideas from other people. The idea of crucibles came from Warren Bennis. The pearl came from a man named Pedro Algorta. Pedro came and wrote me in 2000 after True North first came out, and he said, Bill, 35 years ago, I had a devastating experience. I was on my plane with my rugby team, and we were flying over the Andes Mountains, and our plane went down. And we were in street clothes. We had no food and no water for 72 days. And I'd love to tell you that story. And because he was a guy that denied his crucible for 35 years, even when Stanford Business School never told anyone about it. And then he now is flourishing because he is now capturing that story and helping other people deal with their difficult times. So he said, you got to find the pearl in there. Dan Vassell, that I talk about in the book, one of the great CEOs of the pharmaceutical industry, CEO of Novartis, and I was on his board for 10 years, just a great human being. He was in an iron lung for a year, okay? And his parents never visited him. Can you think of the pain of that? Being in a
yeah.
sanatorium and never having parents. And so he became a doctor because of that experience, not in spite of it, but because of it. He said, I want to help other people. And then he decided, I want to help more than one person at a time. I want to go out and help a lot of people. And that's why I became CEO of Novartis. So you see that crucible had a formative effect going all the way back to when he was an 8-year-old little boy, and he was scared and in this sanatorium. And so those early life experiences, like mine with my father, have very formative effect on us.
No, and I'm happy you mentioned that because I think that we often look at failure and weaknesses where it's like, again, things to be corrected, but really it's to be understood. And I think when you understand them, you're able to leverage them. I think you'll enjoy this. One of the exercises that I kind of came up with a long time ago. You're familiar with the book 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I tell people is like, go through those laws of power, identify the 3 that are the ones you violate. And I always hear people say like, well, that's just identifying things I'm bad and weak at. I'm like, exactly. Because the moment that you realize like, what are those areas of weaknesses, like you've kind of unlocked a clue to your path to, in my opinion, self-actualization. Right. And you talk about, I have your book open, and again, a lot of people watch this on Spotify, YouTube. For those who are watching, I just want to kind of, flip through and so you guys can see, like, aside from the text, there are a lot of graphs and frameworks. That's the one thing I really enjoyed about the book is the frameworks, right? But going back to the crucibles, you mentioned Warren Bemis, and I want to read what you had written at the beginning of the crucibles chapter, which is the crucible is an essential element in the process of becoming a leader. Whatever's thrown at them, leaders emerge from their crucibles stronger and unbroken. And that's Warren Bemis on becoming a leader. But to be clear, this isn't about, we've lost shareholder value, the stock has gone down. You're talking about big blows life has dealt you. And something I hope you don't mind me asking, you talk about your crucible in here. And when I started reading, I thought maybe it was a tough time at Medtronic or something, maybe it was something else. And it was extremely heartbreaking for me to read as a, man who's, I just got married a few years ago. My wife and I had a son. You mentioned how as a young man, you met a wonderful girl, and you guys were getting ready to get engaged. She had a headache. You guys went to a doctor. Doctor just said she was, crazy, needed to go see a psychologist. And, 2 weeks before your wedding, this woman, this girl, you fell in love with, you're a young man getting ready to start your life, dies suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that crucible if it's okay? And how did that make you who you are?
So there are things in life we don't understand. And I tried to teach my grandson this when he was 11. We were looking at Nelson Mandela's cell. And I told him about spending 27 years for a crime he didn't commit. He said he couldn't understand that. I said, there are the things that took me a long time to learn. One of them is that good things don't always happen to good people. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And so don't. And the second one, is that we don't often, until we have these experiences, we don't appreciate who we are. And life is not always fair. And sometimes life knocks you down and you pick yourself up and brush yourself off and you come back stronger from that. If you never get knocked down, if your life is like a rocket ship to the moon, you may get knocked down at 50 and you may not be able to recover at 60. You may have not understood what life is all about. So that sure knocked me down. Now, I'd had a previous experience. I was never very close to my father. It's by the story I told you. But I was very close to my mother. She was the source of all my values. And she died suddenly. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye. She had a heart attack. She'd been having cancer. And I'm an only child. And I was very close to her because my father traveled 80% of the time. But, so then, 18 months later, so this is like a 1-2 punch. And I'm a person of faith. But it really caused me to examine my faith because my faith didn't have any easy answers. Mm-hmm. But here's the unusual thing. And I try to say this is true sometimes, but you get fired from your job and that door closed behind you and you can't go back. All of a sudden a new door opens and you have a whole new life that you couldn't see before because you were standing behind that closed door. And that happened to me. A few months after my fiance died, my wife came into my life. A woman named Penny came into my life. And I can't explain these things. I'm not trying to give you a religious explanation or a philosophical one, but she came into my life and it was right. We've been married for 53 years and it's been wonderful. And so I don't know. And I feel sad about the experience with my fiance, but you do learn about the hard times in life. And so that's why the crucible is important because, okay, I'm a Harvard Business School graduate. I'm working in the Department of Defense. No, none of that matters. None of that. That's all just a bunch of, pretense, The only thing that matters are the people around you can count on. Who do you love and who do you care about? And is that true of your work? Do you love the people you work with? There are times at Honeywell when I had a boss who was manipulating me and I felt like I had to put the armor on every day, like a bulletproof vest, to protect myself because I knew I was going to get beaten up unfairly and in front of a large group of people. I mean, that was his game. He loved to do that. And show me who the boss was. And, I don't take well to that kind of stuff. I can tell you. And, but is that how I want to live my life? The answer was no. And did I want the CEO job of this giant company so much that I was willing to put up with it? No. At a certain point in time. And of course, when I went to Medtronic, I didn't realize how fast a high-tech company could grow. But the point was, it was like that one door, I closed the door, I left. But the other door opened and it was like, wow, I didn't see this potential out there before because I'm thinking big companies. And here's a company, now it has grown up to become a big company, but it sure wasn't when I went there. But, this potential is enormous to build something. Isn't that really exciting? We're building a cathedral at Medtronic. That's what I felt.
And it's interesting you mention all that, again, like one of the reasons why this I say this book is not to be read, it's to be studied. You talk about the great psychologist Abraham Maslow. For the audience who don't listen, like when you think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the top is self-actualization. That's where it comes from. And one of the things that Maslow found was that tragedy and trauma were the most important human learning experiences to leading to this concept of self-actualization. I think one of the great examples, for the audience who knows this, Jeffrey Moore, who's wrote Crossing the Chasm, I've, become friends with him and we interact. He had a piece today about the downturn, right? And I left a comment on there saying that, if Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, taught us all that you can be in a Nazi concentration camp and find meaning in that suffering, then you can surely find some meaning and a way to get out of like a bad business situation. But Bill, do you feel? I feel like when on the path of finding your true north, this is the catalyzing step that if you skip it or choose not to look at it, it cannot happen. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, your true north is who you are. And see, the problem is early in our life, we're concentrating on what we are. Here's why I went to school, Omar. Here's what I studied. Here are the sports I played. Here are the awards I won. Here's how I had to write this essay and I got into this great college or university. Then I did well in school and I got into this fellowship and then I got this great job and now I got a great job with Goldman Sachs or, JP Morgan or whomever. And, and that's not who you are. That has nothing to do with who you are. That's what you are. And that's, that's what you're showing to the world. This is like wearing a nice suit every day. That's not who you are. That just covers up who you are. And so I think we have to strip. That's why the crucible is so important. You strip all that away, and that's where you find your true north. And that's what's going to point you in the direction that you want to take your life. But if you're trying to be something you're not, because a parent wanted you to be or your company wanted you to be, trying to be something you're not, it's not going to go well. You're going to feel like a phony or you're going to feel very unhappy. And so, and I wanted to be a different kind of CEO, and that's not what Honeywell wanted. They wanted a more traditional, bureaucratic, a guy that sits at the top of the enterprise and directs everyone what to do, like an air traffic controller. That's not what I wanted to be, And it took me a while to see past that title to get to what was my true north? My true north was helping. My true north today is and my purpose, I'm trying to help people reach their full potential. That's what I love to do. And you could say, well, I'm not an expert in medicine. I went to Medtronic. I had lots of high tech experience and engineering degree, but no medical. But I really want to help people reach their full potential. That's what I love to do. And when they go beyond what I've done, that thrills me. That's exciting. So I think we all have to find our true north. And where do you use your calling? And what are the gifts? What are the unique gifts you bring to the world? And then how do you take them out?
On that same note, like what happens, an interesting thing happens when you get into the machine of, let's say, whether it's a startup or a big company, which is sometimes you're at odds with who you really are versus who the company wants you to be. And sometimes there's ways where you have to adapt and evolve, right, to find some alignment. But if you can get more like a little bit specific on this, what happens when leaders focus on the wrong things, right? What does that look like? And then what's the manifestation? You have a whole chapter about leaders who essentially failed in finding their true north, aren't doing a great job these days. I won't mention them. For the readers, you should. That's if you like company gossip and like these absolute like train wrecks. Like that's a great chapter to read. So you can avoid not becoming like that. But what's that look like when you focus on the wrong things? Like,
well, when you focus on the external pretense and you focus on having power over other people, what you do is you take away other people's potential. You shut them down. You're not really empowering them. And then you're trying to make them be like you. I mean, that was the great failing of General Electric. And everyone wanted to be like Jack Welch. And no one could be like Jack. You can imagine.
Did that work? Did that work, though, at one point in time where that model worked? Or was that something that never could work? Because, I mean, at one point, GE was doing great, right?
Well, by what criteria? By criteria.
Was.
First year, they were doing great. And
yes.
But let's set that aside. This worked great for white males in their late 30s and early 40s. I'm being very blunt now. And because you had
You're on the right show.
That Welch mold, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you had to be that, and you had to sit around the bar till 2 or 3 in the morning. Suppose you don't drink. And maybe if you're a woman there, you don't like someone who is the CEO doing inappropriate things with you while you're trying to sit next to the CEO.
Right.
That kind of stuff went on all the time. And so, yeah, you have to follow. That's what I object to. I don't think there should be a corporate mold. There has to be a corporate culture of what the values and the mission and the values are, but that's very different than a corporate mold.
How's that different?
I've got a way. Like, Omar, you're not wearing a tie today. Why not? That's a corporate mold. Even at IBM, I was told when I worked there for a summer job, I'm a 22-year-old kid fresh out of engineering school at Georgia Tech. And I can assure you we didn't wear ties to class or anything like that. So I was assigned to work for a salesman, and I had a beautiful new olive green suit I'd just gotten for graduation with a powder blue shirt I had on and a nice tie. And he said, "Do you have any other suits?" I said, "Well, I've got one." He said, "What color is it?" I said, "Navy blue." He said, "Wear it." I said, "Every day?" He said, "Yep, every day. You can't wear it and you need a white shirt. You can't wear that powder. This is a corporate mold. And I really resist that, putting people into that place, because that doesn't allow them to flourish and be who they are. Think if you're a creative artist, how are you going to flourish in that environment? So I think that's what we need to do as organizations, is allow people to really flourish and to use their gifts and not try to force them into a bureaucratic mold.
What do you? Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm gonna press you a little bit on this though, because and it's not me. I want you to provide the ammunition for the person who's listening to this who has this belief, because I agree with that. There's a corporate mold, and then there's values and culture. They're like two very, very different things, but I think people mix that up all the time and they confuse them, right? What if the idea of allowing people to flourish, etc. What if goals and objectives aren't being met, right? There's this temptation to kind of come and say, hey, there's a way that we're going to do things, and it's this way. Like, can you help us pull that apart? Because I think there's a confusion between corporate mold versus like developing a culture, right? And they get confused all the time. Help us pull that apart a little bit.
Okay, so Medtronic. I mentioned our mission is restoring people to full life and health. Our metric is how many seconds take place between the time until another person gets their life is restored by a Medtronic product. And when I was talking to a colleague, he said he came there, it was 360 seconds. When I came there, it was 100 seconds. When I left, it was 7 seconds. Today, it's 2 per second. Now, is that a good metric? I don't know. It doesn't say anything about profitability, but that's our mission. We're fulfilling the mission. And that's something everyone in the company can relate to. Not everyone can relate to $3.91 a share. Trust me. Maybe the people on top. And so what are the goals? Our job is to bring all that together and understand how to organize so we fulfill the mission. And at the same time, we're achieving the goals we've set for ourselves. Revenue growth is a good metric. Do people appreciate our products? At market share, they're very good metrics. Employee engagement. I just reading a study today said 32% of the people are engaged. It's a disaster.
How do you build a company? How do you build a company with that metric? I think it was a year ago. What was it? Remember quiet quitting? They said like 50% of people are quiet quitting. How are you going to build an organization if 50% of them want to quiet quit?
That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Quiet quitting. Look, no, seriously, if anyone on this call is quiet quitting, quit.
Yeah, just quit. I agree.
Quit. And just get out. Buy a ticket, fly to Hawaii, sit on the beach for a week and say, what do I want to do with my life? Because don't let your life waste away by doing something you hate and trying to do the minimum and hope you won't get caught. And that's why a lot of people don't want to come into the office. Engage. Find something that's exciting. If it doesn't excite you, it's true. Back at Honeywell, there are times I dreaded coming to the office. I told you, I put on the armor. If you can't get excited every day about going to work and say, this is great, we're saving lives, or whatever we're doing, this is really fun. And then we come together around goals. It's like a sports team, Omar. We're going to the World Cup soccer tournament. Yeah, we want to win. We're not going to win them all, but we want to win. And by the way, if you have people on the team that aren't in winning, well, they probably shouldn't they shouldn't get on the playing field, because we're coming together. We have a common goal here. Yeah, winning is fun. And, so call me too competitive, but that's kind of what it is. I think, and winning for Medtronic was defined as having more people restored to full life and health by our products.
You know, I have an analogy, and I wonder if you would agree with this, that it feels like the corporate mold can be exemplified or analogized as the things that you see, right? What are you wearing? How do you talk? What do you do? Which to the point you mentioned earlier, is like putting on a suit. That's not who you are. Versus your true north is less about what you say and what you see, but more about your actions, because your actions are what matter the most, right? Those are the manifestations of your values, right? And I think that's what you're getting at as a whole in this book. Am I wrong in that analogy?
No, and it's how do you go about things? Okay, a lot of companies are going through layoffs right now. We have to go through layoffs. Do you do it humanely? Can we figure out people who can most likely, or maybe we should cut back hours? Do we have a job fair that people are being laid off? How do we, in other words, is there a humanity there? Or do you just, I was hearing last night, somebody got fired by, a phone call, or do we send out pink slips and say, okay, just, you got the word, don't come into the office. I mean, there is how you do things with a certain level of caring and humanity. I've had to fire people, and I've said to them, honestly speaking, this is not the right job for you, not the right company. You'd be better off with it. Medtronic's grown up from a little company to a large company. You'd be a lot happier with a small organization. And they get angry, and boy, they come back a couple of years later and say, "Wow, thank you so much. It opened up a whole new life for me. I'm much happier now." So great,
There's there's again, I know we're focusing a lot on crucibles, but I just feel like that's such an important part of the book. And I feel that, you start that on, I don't know, closer to page, like I think 30. So it's at the very top of the book. And again, I'm saying this for the listeners, because they're going to buy this book. You cannot skip. I personally believe that when you read the Crucible chapter, you're going to have to spend maybe a few weeks, if not a few months, meditating on that one area. You can go on to the rest of the book, but like it's going to take you time to figure that out. Do you feel that
take out a blank piece of paper, Omar, and try to write out your own crucible? And all my class at Harvard, you have to do that. And you actually have to put it in writing. Why is it important to put it in writing? Because that really forces you to think through it. What the meaning? And then you sit with a group of 5 other people and you explain your crucible. And you just told me yours. Now I'm telling you mine. And you may ask me some questions. Tell me more about
Interesting.
that. What was the impact of you, or how did that shape your thinking, or how has that affected you since then? And, and by the way, the hardest crucible deal one's the one I'm right in the middle of now. And people will tell you, I just got fired and I'm so angry at this boss that fired me. And that doesn't give me a chance, and so, those are the hardest ones, because you don't know how it's going to come out, but you need to step back and think of the greater meaning for your life, for who you are. And that's why it's the who you are, not the what you are. The resume tells us what you are. Don't tell anything about who you are.
I love the way you convey it. And there's something I want to, ask you about, but.
All right, everybody, quick break to finish up our 2-part mini interview with Annie Cesario, who's the VP over at Clary, talking about the 4 stages of digital sales maturity. And if you haven't already, go ahead and click that button below, whether you're a sales manager or a director or VP. Again, I can't emphasize it enough, and mainly because I want to see this industry get better. Book that time with Clary, get some insights, really get educated about what it means to run revenue and how to actually turn your CRM into something that actually helps you drive sales activities versus being a huge administrative burden and a black hole of meaningless data. So let's get to that quick episode with Anthony of Clary.
Predictability. And candidly, when we talk to chief commercial officers, right, the CCOs at these companies, this is actually what they're being held accountable to from the board, from the investors. They're being asked to predict earlier how their sales team is going to perform. But the challenge is you can never really get to that more predictable selling motion until you have credibility and rigor in place on top of, the sales teams. And ultimately, when you start getting predictability, you want to do that across all commercial teams, not just 1 or 2. And so that's how we think about digital sales maturity, Omar. At Clary, we like to think, it's very hard to do this with CRM alone. And so, I won't give the Clary commercial, but I'll flash up really quick. We like to think the value we bring to companies is we help you accelerate through these milestones in weeks and months, not quarters. And happy to help share any time with any of the listeners, figure out how they can maybe accelerate their path through some of these key digital sales maturity milestones.
Absolutely. And again, this is why, I've been a big fan of Clary, and I love what you guys do. Because essentially, an investment in Salesforce is a really big one for a lot of companies. And that investment falls short. I don't know very many companies at all who have been in the med device space who are utilizing it. And so seeing how Clary essentially de-risks that and essentially helps these sales teams get the most out of this platform is the best. And I think honestly, the more companies in our space adopt Clary to get the most out of Salesforce, you'll start hearing reps saying that, I actually hit my quota this quarter because of the insights and the actions that Clary helped me take, right? And so I want to just thank you for coming on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you guys back on again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, anytime. And again, we're kind of nerds over here at Clary. We're obsessed with learning from the best sales teams on the planet. So we would love to just hear from your audience. I know you have an incredible audience of some of the best sales leaders, sales reps, sales executives on the planet within the med device world. So please reach out. Let's trade notes. Let's learn from each other. Looking forward to spending more time with the community.
All right, and that wraps up our interview with Anthony of Clary. Again, take advantage of that demo with them. Click that link below, book that time, learn more about them. And again, if you really want to be able to run revenue, it starts with making your CRM a place of valuable data and objective decision making versus just reporting the news, which we all do it because we never had access to not only good data, but a framework and a platform that actually helps us extract that value out of it. So with that being said, let's get back to our episode with Bill George.
Again, just like this book is to be studied, a lot of the audience who listen to the show study these podcasts, so they will re-listen to this. But I want to read the questions to ask part from your Crucible sections. Is that okay with you if I do that?
Sure. Yes.
So for those who are listening, come back to this one part of the episode and sit down with a piece of paper and answer these questions. So question number one write a number question number one and write A through D. Write about your greatest crucible and describe how you felt at the time, the resources you called upon to get through it, how you resolved the issues if you have done so, and how did this experience shape you and the views you have about the world. And then questions 2 and 3, number 2, how can you use these experiences to reframe your life story and understand yourself and your life more fully? And number 3, are there ways these experiences are holding you back today? I think the most important part about this, Bill, is that if you cannot understand these things about yourself, you're not going to be able to lead yourself effectively. And rather than understanding, and I think this is the deeper part of your book, it's an idea of pulling apart your ego, which wants a fancy title, it wants more money, it wants this, all these things, which is not what gets you to self-actualization, versus your intuition, which is about who you are at heart and will never push you. Your intuition is just that subtle nudge where somebody listening to this podcast is going to quit their job because they know they're at a company just like you are at Honeywell, and they know deep down inside, this is not where I'm supposed to be. I will never be happy here. But in order for them to stay in that company, they're getting further and further removed from who they really are, and they'll never self-actualize. Do you feel like that happened to you at Honeywell, and that's why you left?
Yeah, and I want to say that I want to link some things. I told you a story. I lost 7 elections in a row, okay?
Yes.
Because I was grabbing for a title. I was, how old was I at the time? 18, 19 years old, right? Okay. At Honeywell, I'm now in my early 40s. I'm grabbing for that brass ring of being CEO. I'm not even sure I want to be CEO, but I got this subliminal message from my father. I'm not going to pick on my father here, but I'm carrying this forward. Whose life is it? Mine or his? I mean, he was thrilled when I got to be CEO of Medtronic. He was 90 years old. But my point is that it's you can repeat this, and so it's that you use the word. You asked the question about reframing. I think reframing is really important, rather than looking at, oh my God, this was a terrible thing. No, I actually learned from that experience about who I am and what I want to do with my life. why was it so important that I be CEO of a mega company like IBM or like Coca-Cola? Why is that important? Is that really what you want to do with your life? I was much happier at Medtronic. Nothing against IBM's a great company. I admire Coca-Cola. I'm just saying, what do you want to do with your life? Maybe you don't want to work in business at all. Maybe you want to go off and do something totally different. And maybe you got pushed on this track by a father or a grandfather, or you're following a family tradition, or because you went to a business school. But maybe you want to do something else. And maybe you're suppressing the real talent you have.
I love that you mentioned that, and just I'm gonna add an extra exercise for everybody on the Crucible side, because I had done this actually a year ago, and it was very eye opening for me. And again, for those who are watching on YouTube and Spotify, you get the pleasure of seeing the book. So on page 27, you actually have a figure called A Sketch of Bill's Leadership Journey. And again, it starts from the time you're born all the way to 80, 90, where you go up and down. And the thing I want people to do is to take that piece of paper and draw a horizontal line, and start from as early as possible, maybe from the time you're 5 years old, and start drawing a line on the y-axis being good, as you go higher, and the lows, of course, and start drawing your peaks and valleys of things that happen in your life, and then go back and start analyzing them. For me, one of my crucibles was, I'd always wanted to be a physician. My father was a surgeon. I worked extremely hard. I killed myself in college, did everything possible, got into medical school, full scholarship and everything, in Texas. And 3 years in, I realized this is not for me. And there is, and again, I want to go back to finding your true north, and a big theme of the book. My medical school professor sat down one day with me and told me, he said, Omar, you're doing okay, and we're all rooting for you. And I think a lot of people could see you being a great physician. But in order for you to make it out and become a surgeon, I'm not sure you can do that with who you are today. And I'm wondering, how much does Omar have to become not himself in order for that to happen? And that was and again, I was a young guy, I was in my 20s, and that was devastating for me to hear. Just absolutely gut-wrenching. But the fact that I leaned into that, and I was at least smart enough to talk to people who supported me and said, yeah, if you can't see yourself doing this, you got to leave, And I think that's, again, a big thing about what you're conveying in the book. And the thing I wanted to read to you, Bill, I wanted you to kind of expand on this for the audience. At the end of Crucibles, you wrote this, that you recognize that there are many things in life we can never explain. In the words of St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 13:12, provided the greatest comfort. Now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. What does that mean to you? And how should the audience think about that lesson?
As I said, I'm a person of faith, so I believe in an afterlife. But in today's life, we can't understand. I can never explain to you why my fiance died. I can't explain to you why my wife, Penny, was the perfect person for me, or we wouldn't be married 53 years later. I can't imagine a more ideal situation for me came into my life. How did that happen? And so I think we have to accept there are things in life we don't understand, rather than saying, oh, God is evil because my son died. And no, there are things we learn in life. And a lot of it is finding ourselves. You mentioned about your own story about being a surgeon. My son is a surgeon, my younger son, John. He's a great surgeon. He's a head and neck cancer surgeon, which is the hardest form of surgery. He's at UCSF, and he does stage 4 cancer, really messy stuff. And, but he doesn't want to be a leader. Some people are saying, oh, John, you should be dean. I don't want to be that. I just want to do surgery. He isn't even sure he didn't want to go in the labs and do research. He wants to be a surgeon. I said, what do you do, John, if you have a case you've never seen before and you can't handle it? He said, I've never seen one like that. He's done thousands of cases and he knows what he's doing, but he loves doing that. And our family is very involved in a lot of community affairs. They have a big foundation. He said, Dad, I feel like I'm helping in the community every day. My humanitarian efforts every day is when I save someone's life through surgery. So, yeah, I don't have time. No, that's true. I work, 10, 12 hours a day, I commute and everything. He said, I don't have time to go work at a soup kitchen or something like that. but I feel like I'm helping people every day. So you take your gifts. I think the whole point here is figuring out what are your unique gifts you bring to the world, and then how you're going to help people through using your gifts rather than trying to be something you're not. And
Mm.
you have obviously a lot of gifts. Maybe that person sat down to you, that was bitter medicine, but at the time, it might have been the best thing you ever heard, to say, have you thought about, you really should, don't try to do this. And, John didn't have to follow his father's footsteps and be, a department chair or, CEO of UCSF or, be head of, a MedTech company. No, he loves doing what he's doing. So great. Right. Why not?
Yeah, and I think, and by the way, I just want to do a quick time check. I know you're good on your time, but we're top of hour. I'm okay. You okay to go a little bit
I'm
longer?
okay. Yeah. If the audience is okay, I'm okay.
You look like you're having a good time with me. Let's be honest. Are you having a good time?
Great questions about the right things.
Yeah, you know what? I appreciate that. I spend a lot of time doing that. By the way, your PR team is fantastic. They're great, but they were asking me, they're like, "Hey, what questions are you going to ask Bill?" I'm like, "Well, I'm thinking about these ones." They're like, "What else?" I was like, "Hey, look," I was like, "We're going to have a very good conversation." He wrote the book. I think he'll be able to handle the question, but they're a great PR team, by the way.
Yeah,
I was like,
you go with the flow. And
you got it. You have to. And that's what people love about this show. It's not canned,
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
So let's, now that we covered the crucibles, let's cover another really interesting topic, which again, when I announced that you're coming on the show, I got a lot of messages from people like, "Hey, can you ask Bill this or that?" So one of those things as a theme is, what does a train wreck look like? Look, there's a reason why when people get on the highway and there's a wreck, everybody slows down to look at it. Can you give some examples of really bad, inauthentic leadership? I guess if if your true north is what you're trying to look for, what's a false south, I guess, of leadership that in your mind is happening today? Because you write about this, and this is why I love your LinkedIn.
I'm going to avoid the easy ones and not talk about Elizabeth Holmes with her fraud around the finger prick, or this woman that just defrauded J.P. Morgan for 175 million. I'm not going to talk about these. I'm going to talk about Mark Zuckerberg, who is a guy who has great success. He created the whole field of social media. But you know what? He created it on a false premise, because the premise was, we're giving you a free site. You can bring all your friends in, Omar. You bring in all your friends and see how you find some new friends that want to join you. This is great. It's a friend site. Yeah, except he didn't tell you he's not only taking your profile, but your friend's profile and selling that against whatever you can say on Facebook that may indicate your psychological biases or things you don't like, and then accelerating those and playing them up. Maybe you're angry about X, and so they play up that. And you never agreed to that. You never agreed they could take your person. How about your health? Say you had a health crisis. Maybe you're going to see a therapist, because you have some mental health problems, right? You may not want your employer to know that. They can sell that information back. And I think this is just wrong, And so if you built on a false premise, but I feel sorry for him. He started at 39, at 19, he's now 39, but he never figured out what his values are. And so he's not figured out. So he thinks his true north is measured by how many followers Facebook has. Okay, 2.2 billion. It's incredible. No one ever did anything like this. Yeah, but, how are you using that? So, is what you're doing sound? Even Elon Musk, as successful as, is kind of losing his playing this game with Twitter. He created a great company in Tesla, the breakthrough. I know the heads of automobile companies very well. I've worked closely with people like Mary Barra and Alan Mulally and at Ford. They're incredible what they've done. But no one's ever come out with a car right off the first production line like Tesla that was perfect and a whole breakthrough field. He's created the whole field of electric automobiles. Now everyone's going there. But now he's fooling around with his political ideas, and he's losing sight of the company. And I think it's a tragedy. So he needs to figure out, why is he so enamored with Twitter? I mean, this is peanuts. That this year, Tesla's coming back a little bit now because they cut prices, but he lost 660 billion of shareholders' money.
Oh yeah, I was one of them. I love that company, everything, but I actually, with my advisor, had to sell some of it off, right?
Yeah, because But why is he fooling around with $44 billion purchase of where he paid double his worth of Twitter? What for? What's the goal?
Do
To
you
let
think?
a lot of bad people back. I don't want to get into politics, but I'm just saying, you have to be some civility. I criticized on LinkedIn because I think free speech has its boundaries. Okay. And if I stand in a classroom and make a homophobic remark, a misogynistic remark, an anti-Semitic remark, I have to leave Harvard. If one of my students does that, they have to leave the school. I mean, we have to have some boundaries. Is that free speech? No, it's not okay to say those things. It's just, but he's now saying, oh, well, you can do anything. Well, no, you can't. There are limits to it. And we need to restore some kind of civility. And these sites, the one I like is, you mentioned earlier, is LinkedIn, because there's a civility to the site that doesn't exist in some of these others.
Oh, I totally agree. Do you
I'd love
think?
to have a debate with you. You can say, Bill, you're wrong about that. And I get a lot of people saying on LinkedIn, Bill, you're
So
totally wrong. Great. Let's talk about it.
okay, all right. You asked for it. So here's. So I don't completely disagree actually. What I'm here's my thought, and again, I can't read anybody's mind. When I look at the thing with Twitter, obviously it's a platform that has a lot of influence, right? And a lot of influence on the world today. I feel like with Tesla, they kind of had their heyday, right? And now there's just a lot of competitors coming out in the market with equally as good electric vehicles, right? And so I think he sees this as an opportunity to leverage into another platform and another business. And I think maybe part of it is because there's something that, maybe there's a true north that he has, and he was so compelled by what he saw on Twitter that's what took him there. But that's at least how I see it. If you're talking to Elon today and he said, "Hey, Bill," let's say you hypnotized him, and he said, "Bill, you tell me, what should I do?" What would you tell him to do?
I would say, Elon, you're the greatest inventor of our era. Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, maybe an earlier era, you're the greatest inventor of our era. There's so many other things you can do. How about other forms of renewable energy? How about you're already investing in batteries that break the back of battery costs, which were staggering. And what can you do to transform the whole climate change thing with new forms of energy? Maybe geothermal, Elon. You could figure that one out. Maybe it's in the chemical lab putting things together. That's what they do in the pharmaceutical field. They just take things from the jungles, literally, and like foxglove, which is digitalis, and make it into a drug. And you could do that. And that's what I'd say. Don't fool around with social media. That's just an ego trip. You're on an ego trip to get a lot of attention by saying crazy things. And this is, why are you doing it? Because use your greatest gifts. You can't be good at everything. Just like I told you about my son, who's a great surgeon. My other son's a great leader, but my one son doesn't even want to be a leader. Great. That's fine. Use your gifts.
I agree. And, I would be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy the fact that he took over Twitter and, made those decisions, because I think the platform's gotten better. But let's go back to true north. Elon's true north is that he wanted to develop a future where we had sustainable energy, we're using technology and everything. Tesla, SpaceX, Solar City all accomplish that. Twitter is it's all on far left field, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that he saw that it was being misused. It's very clear it's being misused, at least in the past, and it was very biased. Okay, he acquired it. I think the next best move for him right now is go find a good operator. And I think this was your advice to him online. Go find a good operator, good CEO, install them. You be the chairman. Yeah, go back to doing what Elon does best, right?
But we should all do that. That's the whole point of figuring out. You can't do everything. So figure out, what are you really good at? For instance, I love teaching at Harvard Business School, but I am not a pure academic, okay? I've done my share of research, but I'm not a pure academic, and I don't think I went to the wrong field. I don't go to the academies and all that, because I'm more interested in engaging with individual leaders and helping them become better. And that's why I love doing exec ed and bringing in mid-career people and CEOs. And a lot of them I'm counseling with are coaching, whatever you want to call it. Had 2 or 3 this week, and I love doing that. So you have to figure out what are your strengths, and where can you make a difference, and publishing in the Journal of Institutional Psychology is not, I'm not going to make a difference there, but I think I can make a difference in the life of someone who's struggling in their leadership. Like I have a colleague right now that has advanced cancer, and he's CEO of a very major company. Okay, and he's got to figure his way through that. This is really hard. He's new CEO. And so how do you do that? Can I help him? That's kind of my view is, yeah, I think I can help.
One of the things I was gonna ask you about, like you've done and again, this is how you've jumped on my radar, which was, you're writing on LinkedIn. I feel like when you study a book like True North, and again, for the readers listening, like click the link in the show notes below, get the Emerging Leader edition. That's the latest edition that you want. You have to engineer activities on a daily basis that allow you to practice this concept in public. And I think writing on LinkedIn is great. Look, no offense to Medtronic. I'm a startup guy, so I have plenty of critiques on them. But one of those things I will say that they do a good job of, and Jeff Martha is doing a good job of, is going on a daily, if not weekly basis to tell that story of what the missions and values are, especially for him, like as a family man, as a leader, and doing that. Can you talk to us like, look, Bill, you're wildly successful at this point. There's no reason that you need to be on LinkedIn writing, let alone like coming on my show. Why do you do it?
Because I want to influence leaders to lead authentically and not be phonies. And we got too many phonies. I've got a new article coming out this week on integrity. Look, integrity is not the absence of lying. In our society, we're accepting the lack of integrity. And this is terrible. How can you and I operate? Can we trust each other if you're going to dishonest? If you're going to take my show and you're going to carve it up and make me say exactly opposite, you've got some clever people that can take my words and make it sound exactly the opposite of what I was saying and say, oh, Bill George, no, I have to have a trust with you. And that has to do with your integrity. And so to me, if we don't have that, first of all, can we get to agreement on what is truth? Now, there's no truth about leadership, but some things we have to have truth about, okay? And if we can't get agreement on that, we can't get to go. And then I think we need a certain amount of transparency. I'm very transparent about everything. You can see everything, I'm out there. But I think that's how we build trust, because my characteristic, I trust people until they prove themselves unworthy of their trust. And sometimes that happens. And so everything, you don't think CEOs would be calling me and confiding in very, very personal matters unless there was a certain trust that I was going to protect their confidentiality. This could be highly disturbing. So I think that's what we've got to do in our society. And I think we've gotten away from it. So I'm trying to get leaders who will bring that back. Okay. And yes, I have a point of view. I don't like power-based leaders that are all out for themselves and it's all ego. And I think we have to have a certain humility. And so I admire people who do things the right way. So there are a lot of them in the book. And by the way, there are a lot of female leaders who have done things the right way. And I try to highlight them. And they're very significant. And because I think we've got to feel, everyone feels included. Omar Ishraq, take him. Okay, here's a guy who's born in Bangladesh, CEO of Medtronic. He works for GE for 16 years. He's a devout Muslim. So how do you think he feels when people said, all these Muslims are terrorists? How do you think Omar feels about that? Omar has got ability just to kind of block it out, but that's terrible. That's totally, you would never say it in my classroom, I guarantee you. And so, but I teased him a lot about, you mentioned Jeff Martha, mission and values. Yeah, that's what the company's all about. And that's why I teased him about GE their mission being making money. Well, he's really adopted the mission and brought it to a much higher level with a much larger company and just carrying that on. It's hard, Yeah. But I have to admire that background. And I love learning from Omar about what it's like to go to Mecca and do the Hajj. That's not something I can do. I think that's great. So it's that inclusive sense that people from very different backgrounds can come together and learn from each other. And you need that. You need to create an inclusive organization in order to make them want to be a part of your organization. And that's where Medtronic is today.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, look, for a lot of the concepts you talk about, the average, let's say sales rep, right? Let's go as like, towards more the junior end. Sales rep is like, this is, hey, Bill, this is all great, but like, I got a quota to hit. Like, how's this going to help? And I'll give an example. Like, again, for me as a small business owner, one of the things I have is I have my mission is to change the way MedTech companies sell and market to physicians, right? I think it's very
Right.
outdated. And so I want them to adopt a new way, such as using digital and social media to provide value and engagement, right?
Right. Right.
And and so when I talk to a sales rep, my program's not cheap. So a lot of these sales reps sign up on their own. When I started the company a year and a half ago, every time I got on these calls, I would focus on the money, closing a deal. And my close rate was not very good. And then, of course, you don't read, you don't choose books to read. The books kind of choose you. And so I read some books that sort of put me back on the track of my true north. And I was like, what am I really doing here? I'm really doing this because I want to help reps. They're struggling. They're not accomplishing their goals. And so when I get on these calls and I focus on my mission, which is, hey, and I actually, this is a line. So many reps have heard me say this, which is I get on the call and I say, hey, look, on this call, we're going to talk about my program. We're going to see if we can get you enrolled in that. But if for whatever reason it doesn't work out, it's not for you. At minimum, you're going to walk away with 3 really good ideas. And for about 60-70% of my call, I would focus on just asking questions and helping them out with whatever situation they have. Guess what happened? My revenue went up magically.
Right.
And I think that at a very high level, that's what you're talking about, which is embodying a true north, which is what are our true values and how do we actually take action on that? And if you do all those things the right way over time, because patience is involved, the revenue comes. Would you agree with that?
I agree completely. Now back to the sales rep. When I was at Medtronic, I saw between 700 and 1,000 procedures where you meet the doctor at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, put on the greens, next to his monitor, and actually go in and watch him do surgery. And they give you a little stand where you could behind the patient's head and watch what was going on, do open heart surgery or defibrillator or brain surgery or, and so it's first time I was in it, it took my breath away. But, to me, that's what it was all about. I wasn't selling anyone anything. But I did watch how a lot of these sales reps really helped them because in case of a defibrillator, somebody's got to run the computer. And sometimes the technicians who work for the hospital are not well trained in that. So the Medtronic people are well trained and they get into trouble. The doctor's got to have them because he's working on the patient. The computer's over off to the side. So there is that. But then on the other hand, I walk to these offices. It drives me nuts. There'll be about 20 pharmaceutical reps sitting there and they brought in donuts for the staff. And that was their idea of sales, and
Yeah.
or to get 30 seconds to the doctor with a PowerPoint presentation. To me, if you want to be good in sales, Omar, you help the person do a better job of what they're doing, whatever it is. In this case, you help the doctor, you help the nurses, you help anyone there do a better job. And that's what we all try to do. And that's how we earn our spurs. You know what I mean? You're helping people become better salespeople. But they've got to learn their job is to help the customer become better. It's not just to close the order, get in and get out. I'm not a transaction guy. I'm a relationship guy. And so you build the relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, funny enough is that in my own program, I have a lot of CEOs and founders who join. And my biggest thing is like, look, I know you want to focus on growing revenue and everything, but you have to also like convey why should somebody do business with your company? It's not enough just to have really great technology. Like people want to do business with people that they want to do business with. And it's not by accident, right? Some of the largest companies on planet Earth, even Tesla with Elon, they have a founder where people say like, yeah, I'm buying these products because of also the person who's behind the leadership of this organization,
That's true. And I think not enough people look at the caliber of the leaders. Okay. And that's really important of who you're building a relationship with, and look right at the top. And that, by the way, in choosing a company, anyone's listening, look at the caliber of the leader. Like, let's get away from Medtronic. Let's talk about Stryker. You have a great leader in Kevin Lobo. I got to know John Brown in my era. He was older than I was. He's still alive, but he's been long gone. Here's a company with great integrity, great caliber, and man, you can learn a lot working with Kevin Lobo. Mike, and what what's been happening at Boston Scientific under Mike Mahoney. It's just stunning, And I had struggles. We almost acquired Boston, and Pete Nicholas and I had some issues. So because he was a pure ego guy, he wanted to run Medtronic, we're not going to do that. So we walked away. But hey, Boston Scientific's come back under Mike Mahoney because he's a great leader. The J&J's had great leaders throughout its history. And Alex Corsi did a great job. And now, his successor's coming in doing a great job in a totally different person. I know all these people well, So I just think, look at the leadership and does it represent the values that you represent? Because if it doesn't, so I'm at Litton Industries. I built the microwave oven business up by 20 times. They're having a great thing. And they're looking at me for jobs at corporate. And I'm a young kid. I'm 35 years old or something. And I'm at a group meeting with group head, and the CEO comes up and says to one of my colleagues who's running the oil exploration business, look, about that audit report, I know you have to do what you have to do, but don't ever put it in writing again. So it's okay to pay a bribe, just don't put it in writing. And that's why I knew I had to leave, because this is not my value. So when I got to Medtronic, I uncovered some not very pretty stuff around 1990. Where people were paying bribes outside the United States, and they had to go away. And so they left the company. So I think you have to say, my only point of going off into this is, what are your values? What do you stand for? And then how do you align yourself with people that you respect with common values and try to achieve a common goal? If you can do that, life is great. Professional life is great.
Oh, I absolutely agree. It took me a while to figure that out, but fortunately I did earlier on. Well, we'll see. I have some big episodes this year, but you might be the top episode for the year. So this is great. Okay.
Well, the main thing I want to get through to people is why they should become authentic, real leaders who, you know what I mean? We just need better leaders. We got, I wrote an article for Elsevier, the academic publication. I said, business schools turned out 1 million managers in the last 20 years. We got way too many managers. We need a lot more leaders. We have very few leaders who know their true north and are can lead organizations the right way with a clarity of purpose and values. That's what we need. And so my whole goal in life is try to help develop more leaders. So anyone listening to this who wants to become a leader, and at any level, you don't have to be, head of the organization to be a leader.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing that, I really want to impart. I love when people listen to my to the podcast, and let's say they listen to you, or let's say somebody like Jim Heath or Scott Hunnekins or any of those leaders who are in leadership positions already. But I think that it starts early on, like when you're junior, right? Like when I started off as a rep and as a manager, my biggest thing is like, what responsibilities do I own, and how do I beautify my work and do it so well that it's inspiring to, people higher up in the organization. And I think it's kind of like one of those things, like the way you do anything is the way you do everything, right? And so it's better off that you start practicing that with smaller things first, because when the stakes become extremely high, you have a lifetime of making the right decision when the stakes are low. And then it becomes a lot easier when the stakes are higher. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And by the way, I encourage people to take your top talents, young people, and put them into a situation of crisis, because that's where you really learn who the leaders are.
Ooh, how do you do? How do you do that? Can you give us like a kind of a little step by step? So your thing is take your talents and figure out what they are, and then put them in a situation of crisis. Yeah. So to the rep or young manager listening to this, how can they do that without getting fired? They might get fired. It might be the best good thing for them, but give us some insight on that.
Medicine's not perfect. Okay. My son got himself in a situation and wound up in a lawsuit, and all he did was come in to try to help a colleague who nicked a carotid, and there was blood all over the place. Boy, he learned a lot from that experience, and his colleague, I hope, did too, because his colleague was doing a procedure he never should have done. And my son could have done it, because he has done a lot of that. But, you learn from these painful experiences. Things don't always go well, and so you got to learn from your own mistakes. It's easier to learn from mistakes of others. You got to learn from your own. What did I not do right? And, I've watched reps in the operating room say, doctor, don't do that. But the doctor is going to do what he's going to do. You can't tell him. And so you have to realize there's a line. But yeah, I think we all make mistakes, and you learn from it. I played tennis at Georgia Tech, and I tell you, when I won, I thought I would, I thought I was a lot better than I was, and when I lost, a lot of things got exposed. So when you throw yourself into a crisis, you're going to find out who steps up. And Omar, they're not the people with the big titles. The other people know how to step up. I was on the board of Goldman Sachs. 2008, September 14th, Lehman goes bankrupt. Everything collapses. Lloyd Blankfein steps up. We had two co-CEOs, COOs, Chief Operating Officers. One was Gary Cohen, who stepped up and did a fantastic job, became Lloyd's partner. The other one literally could not come into the office, never returned to the office. He was so traumatized by what happened, and he eventually had to go away for obvious reasons. It hasn't really surfaced since then. He just couldn't handle the crises. Some people can't handle it. They panic. So better to take on a small crisis. I remember Dan Vassallo, as CEO of Novartis, took one of his young high talents in his 30s, and he told me, you got to go run Korea. Well, it turns out he gets there, and they got themselves embroiled in a major recall. And the equivalent of the FDA of Korea said, you got to recall this drug. And he had to go on TV. Of course, he doesn't speak Korean either. And he has to, try to explain what's going on. And boy, what a learning experience that was. So I think you learn from these difficult times. You don't learn to become a better tennis player. We're Australian Open right now. You don't learn to become a better tennis player just by winning. You learn by having your weaknesses exposed. And the same is true, because then you can find out how to surround them. And I would say to anyone listening in, you can't do everything. So surround yourself with people who are really good at things either you're not motivated by or not as good at. So if you're a doctor, that's what I say, find yourself a great administrator, finance person. That's what Mayo did. That's why Mayo so successful, where he served on the board, is, every doctor was teamed with an administrator, finance person, and it worked brilliantly. They always knew the doctors were in charge, by the way, which is the way it should be.
It's funny that you say all this. I'll share something personal. I don't believe in coincidences, and whether the people listening are people of faith, or let's say they're not particularly religious. I don't believe in this concept when somebody says I'm not religious. Everybody's religious. You believe in something, and so this week was a particularly tough week for me as a business owner, and I remember yesterday it was just one of those days. I didn't feel like working. It was a bad day. And I was finishing your book, and I was, again, going through Crucibles, and it provided a lot of comfort, and more importantly, like, it lit up a path for me to really, again, like, embrace, like, when times are really tough and things are going wrong. I looked at your book, and again, like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is to reframe the crises as an opportunity, right? What's your advice to people when they're because I think what you and I just conveyed right now, everybody would agree with it, but the moment that stuff's hitting the fan, and you're in a tough situation, people often forget this. If you're in the middle of a crisis or something's going, what's the first thing that a leader should do?
Bring people around you who you trust and are wise people. Share the problem fully and openly, and take their inputs. You're going to have to make the call, but hear what they have to say. And you're going to get insights you wouldn't otherwise get. And do it fast. Let's do it right now. We need to get together right now and have a meeting. Can you come up? Let's sit. We're going to sit in the conference room. I need your help right now. And reach out to other people. Now, I believe when you have a personal crisis, you need to have a support team around you. I remember back when my fiance died, a group of close friends from Georgia Tech who, they were an hour and a half away and never had even met my fiance, because I was living in Washington. I graduated 3 or 4 years, 5 years before. And now they're off in their professional careers. They came to her funeral, and we sat around and talked that afternoon. And I felt like I had people around me. Otherwise I was going to feel very, very alone. My mother wasn't there to comfort me. My father wasn't able to. And And so who are you going to count on? Who's on your support team? I have support team with my wife, Penny. That's where it starts. But who's on your team? And I have a men's group, just met this morning. and we have 6 of us, and we meet every Wednesday morning, and we talk about really important things in life. One of the guys is experiencing, he had a series of neurological surgeries, and he can't do the things he did before. So what's he looking forward to in life? And so we really talked about that and how important it was to him with his friends and his family, and we gave him some things he could. So who's going to be there for you in that crisis? Okay, and it's not the person with the big title. It's the person that cares about you because you cared about them. All leadership is
Mm.
there's no such thing as one-way relationships, and people that want one-way relationships, I don't have a lot of time for. And
It's interesting you say that it's not somebody with a big title, and I think something, and I'm wondering, you talked about this in your book, but something I think that it's easy advice to give but not to follow, which is when we're in a crisis, we usually look to peers or somebody above us, and a lot of times, like your advice right now about when you're in a crisis, reach out to people, talk to people, which is essentially a way of getting multiple data points and multiple biases looking at the same problem, and you're looking for somebody to give you something that's going to, again, flip on a light switch and illuminate a path that you walk down.
yeah,
And I think one of those things that, you tell me if I'm wrong in saying this, that as a leader we make the mistake of, is sometimes that light switch moment, that data point that's going to change everything, might actually come from somebody who's junior. And I think there's this ego thing where it's like, oh, I'm older than this person, I'm a higher up and everything. They're what are they going to tell me that's going to be life changing, right? But I think sometimes that's what's needed, because you might have somebody who's very junior who, it's like dealing with a child, simplifies this complex problem and gets right to the source.
yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad advice, though.
I have a lot of people like that in my life, and I have a mentor who is 18 years younger than I am, and he was a professor at Harvard Business School. That he became the dean, and he helped me learn the ropes and how things work in academia. And there are times I just get really frustrated, and I said, I'm not going to put up with all this BS. And he said, Bill, just calm down. Here's the way things work. Here's how we'll get it done. And he's been great, Noria. He's just fantastic. He's such a wise person, a lot wiser than I am. So I go to him for wisdom, And I have a lot of other younger people that I talk to my co-author, Zach Clayton, on this book, extremely wise about how do you build a company. And I keep saying, what do you get from me, Zach? I get a lot from you. And he feels there must be something there. So yeah, that's how I think you learn. And I do think, by the way, the real risk for all of us as we age is we don't really listen to young people coming along. So when I wrote this book for emerging leaders, I could only write this. I have a millennial co-author, but because that's who I teach, that's who's in the classroom. I'm listening to their problems. I spent, I'm not doing it now, when I was full-time, 2.5 to 3 hours a day with MBAs and executives in my office. And they never asked about how I'm doing the course. They wanted to talk about life. How can I have an integrated life? My husband's got a big job. I want to have a big job. How's this going to work? We want to have kids, and and how do we have an integrated? How do we deal with this? That's the kind of questions they want to talk about. Or how can I work for this boss even though they're paying me a lot of money? They'd call me up after they graduated. God, I said, it's time to get out. So I think it's that's the kind of relationships you want to build. And frankly, being with people at different age levels keeps you young too. That's really important because you learn so much. Because the philosophies, the beliefs today of I skied with some Gen Zs the other day, and just learning their philosophy of life is even different than millennials. Is different than the Gen Xers, and I'm writing for all of them. But really learning how they're thinking about life is what's really important, because it's a different era today. And by the way, I mentioned crises. Let me say, we have never faced the multiple intersecting crises we are in my lifetime. Now, I'm not counting just before I was born. You may know what happened in Germany in the late 1930s, and we know what happened in the war. Yeah, there are multiple. Today, for the first time since then, we have multiple intersecting crises. We have high inflation. We have a recession coming. We have a war going on in Ukraine. We don't know how that's going to come out. We've got quiet quitting, you mentioned. We've got people who can't hire the people they need, yet they feel they may have to lay them off. We just had a huge layoff in the tech industry. So there's these multiple intersecting crises. Leaders are really struggling to get through this. Plus, they're being asked to speak out on all kinds of issues that may not be their field, whether from climate change to transgender to the role of women in the workplace. And
Mhm.
a lot of CEOs just don't feel qualified to do that, but they're being asked to do it, take a position, and so it's a different world, much tougher world to be a leader today than it was when I was CEO.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I totally agree with you on that. I'm wondering, for is part of having your true north as a leader and figuring that also figuring out what to say no to.
Sure, because I get asked to be on boards, and I have to decide, what do I care about? Am I going to be on something I don't care about? And yeah, I think you have to say no. You have a limited life, you have a limited amount of time, and oftentimes they come and people try and may hire you a new job, and we'll pay you 30% more, and you can do all these great things, and then you get over there, and boy, it's not quite what the grass was not as green as it was painted out to be. And
Mm.
so I think that, yeah, you have to know how to say no. I've had a tough time saying no when people ask me to help them to do things. My first
I
answer is,
I can't imagine what your inbox looks like, to be honest with you.
I had never turned down any request at Harvard Business School to teach in any class, any executive class. I never turned anything down. That was my philosophy. Just say yes. But there are times you get asked to go on boards and help people out, and said, "Look, I'm happy to have some counseling session with you. I just can't join your advisory board. It's only 12 hours a year, but I just can't do another one. I won't do a good job for you." So yeah, I think you have to say no, but
Yeah.
you also have to say no to your ego. That's the hard thing.
Oh, let me. And I was gonna say, and we'll be wrapping up soon. We're gonna do some rapid fire questions, which are fun. I got some fun ones. You can answer them quickly. But just in terms of your ego, ego is the enemy. But I'll quote the great Tony Hsieh, the late Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO of Zappos, who said that, yeah, your ego can be bad, but you would be a fool not to understand what your ego wants, because you're gonna have to give it something, right? But how do you balance that out, especially when you're a talented professional moving up the ladder of management, right? How do you do that?
I am not my title. Okay. I am not
Mm.
my stock price. I had to say this to myself all the time. I am not my stock price. I am not my title. And, I turned down to be the opportunity to be chairman of the board of General Motors. And why did I do that? Frankly, because I had too many other obligations, from Harvard Business School to serving on other people's boards, which I didn't feel I could turn down. And I got the person asked me, a couple of them were pretty upset, but you just have to decide. I said, you know what? I'm going to give you somebody better than I am. Okay. I'm giving you somebody who would be better at the job. A guy named Ed Whitaker, and he did. He came in and transformed the company and then picked out Mary Barra to run it. And so God bless him. So you can't do everything in life. You just have to decide, what are you going to turn down? What can you do? And where are you going to concentrate your energies? You only have one life. And I think
Mm.
that's really important. So I would say to anyone that's going, don't spend your life doing something you really don't love. Take that one-way ticket to Hawaii, go sit on the beach, and then figure out what it is you want to do with your life.
How do you,
Because
but Bill, how do you figure? So I gotta ask, like, I'm with you on that. Like, life is too short to be doing something you don't like, but at the same
mhm.
time, like, I think the worst, in my opinion, you may disagree with this, the worst advice, and I wonder how this plays with your book. I think the worst advice is, like, find what you're most passionate about, because sometimes what you're most passionate about, it ain't going to pay the bills, right? So how do you balance that out and figure out, like, what am I really good at that people are willing to pay money for, and, like, what am I passionate about? There has to be some middle ground there. It can't be just like,
Yeah, yeah.
what do I love, right?
But I think Hubert Joly, my close colleague at Harvard, in his book The Heart of Business, has 4 things you should think about. What are you most passionate about? What are you really good
Mm.
at? Third, what does the world really need from you? You're filling a need that's not there, and they don't need me to be another private equity guy. That's for sure. And then fourth, where can you add enough value to be financially successful? And that's true both for you as an individual and for your company.
Mm.
So that's not so easy to find all 4 things. This is hard work to find all those four things come together. And it's easy to kid yourself that, oh, I could be really, I have a close colleague who went into private equity. He's just not a private equity guy. He's going to leave because he's unhappy. He shouldn't have gone there in the first place. I know those guys. They're really good at what they do, but that's not his field. So you got to decide, what are you really good at? And don't get caught up in just because it seems like an opportunity to make a lot of money. This is a big mistake that some people make.
Yeah.
So I think those four things are really helpful. What are you passionate about? What are you really good at? What does the world need? And where can you make it economically viable?
I think that's really good. And again, in kind of wrapping things up into the rapid fire questions, again, theme of this show is that this is a book to be studied and not read. And I think that one thing I learned in medical school is, as a physician, you have to make decisions that are ethical decisions, really difficult ones. So how do you make those decisions? You don't decide the moment that happens. You have to have your ethics set up ahead of time. And I think right?
That's how you lead to a crisis. See, you don't get in the middle of the crisis, decide what to do. You got to decide in advance, what's your purpose and what are your values? And so when you get into crisis, okay, that's when you have to make the call of saying, what's really important here? What's important to Medtronic is human life. Okay, it doesn't matter what it costs. We're going to fix this problem we created, period. End of discussion. Okay, that's our values. That's our purpose. Okay, and if it costs us a lot of money, great. Remember Jim Burke did that with Tylenol. And everybody said, "Oh my gosh, it costs you a lot of money." Yeah, you got a lot.
What happened with Tylenol? Tell for the younger audience that don't know that story. What happened with Tylenol?
Some terrorist, and they never did figure out who it was, put cyanide inserted in capsules of Tylenol, which you could do in those days. And so they invaded the can, and people died. And so and it wasn't his responsibility. The FDA called him not to withdraw the product. He said, no, we're withdrawing all of them for the shelves. You won't be able to buy Tylenol. We have no idea. It's number one selling painkiller. We don't know if it's going to come back or not, but we're going to do the right thing. And he did. And, Tylenol is still out there, is highly successful because he had the courage to make the right call. And 4 years later, it happened all over again. And he was I watched him, and we show the videos, sweat coming down his brow, and he got angry. And he said, but, and then he put in a device where you actually could not penetrate the pill. And they said, what are you going to say to the mother of Diane Ellsroth, who died from cyanide? And he said, I'm going to say, I wish I'd done this 4 years ago. Now, is he going to get sued over that by her? Maybe, but that's an honest man. That's a man that can say under great pressure, I'm going to tell you the truth. I made a mistake. I wish I'd done it 4 years ago. And that's why you went down in history as a great leader. Jacques Nasser said, oh, we only killed 283 people in our Ford Explorer, but this is a great car. Don't worry about it. Just because it rolls over when, a tire blows up, blame the tire company. Really? When you buy a car, are you sure the tire company has fitted this tire to this car? And if it blows up, it's not going to roll over? No, that's the company's problem. And so, I think, and he got fired, and no one ever heard from him again, so you got to do the right thing. And if you follow your true north and do the right thing, in the end, you'll be okay. You may get a lot of slings and arrows and criticism, but you'll be okay. And you'll be highly respected. And by the way, at the end of the day, I don't care how much money you make. You can't take it with you. So the only thing you take with you is what you leave behind, and that's your reputation. Your legacy is really formed by that. Are you the kind of person that did the right thing? And people do remember those things.
That's very, very powerful, and I'm just kind of like, replaying what you just told me in my mind. No, it's very, very it's very true, and I'll tell you, I think again, the one thing that I'm starting, as I've gotten at the ripe old age of 36, as I've gotten older, I've just realized how important it is to sort of work through these things ahead of time. And I think the mistake people make, let's take leaders out of it. Like what's a mistake I feel people make in their careers, having been somebody who went to medical school, then I went into the device industry, thought I want to be a VP or CEO, and I've had like at least 3 massive crucibles in the last 10 years. What I've realized is that I think the mistake people make, Bill, is they graduate, they go into the workforce, and their thing is, okay, if I work really, really hard and I do whatever it takes to achieve goals, then magically between the people I work for and the companies, I'll get promoted to some position. I'm going to make a lot of money and I'll be good. And I think that the point that you're making is you read this book, you study it, you figure out who you are, what's your true north, and based on those values, then you figure out the actions you need to take to put yourself in a position at a company where you could self-actualize into who you really are. And that's going to provide the most value to your customers, most value to yourself, right? And everything just kind of falls in place versus the ego thing, which is like, what title am I going to have? How much money am I going to make? And then all things map to that, because then that's when you start making all these bad decisions. And then you end up in your latest edition on the chapter of who you should not be.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Again, I mentioned Hugh Bears-Lee, who was CEO Best Buy, fabulously successful, had been CEO of a couple of other companies. He said early in his career, his early 40s, he felt like he had reached the mountaintop. And he said, I got to the top of the mountain and it felt desolate. My life was hollow because I was chasing a title and not a purpose. And he said, I had to tumble down into the valley, as David Brooks talks about, the second mountain. And before I found out where I should really be. But he totally changed his approach to leadership. He was the smartest guy in the room, youngest partner ever at McKinsey, and he reached the top of the mountain in his early, 40 or 41. He realized, no, that's not what I want to do. That's not the kind of leader I want to be. So he had to transform his leadership. And he's become a great leader because of that. But we go through that. There is a mid-career thing, that you go through in your 30s and 40s, that it may not be what you thought it was in the 20s. So that's a good time to reassess. And I bet a lot of people on this call, Omar, are in their 30s and 40s. And that's a good time to say, I've only got one life to live. That's one thing I can tell you. Even if you believe in reincarnation, you've only got one life to live in this earth as Omar. And I want to use it to really find the great fulfillment I'm looking for.
No, I completely agree. And I think one of the things that I wrote down many years ago, I don't know where I read this, but that greatness is enlightened self-interest. And I never understood what that meant until I got older, which is the better you're able to understand yourself, the better you're able to lead yourself. And as a result, everything else in the world kind of makes sense, right? And I think that, again, like a lot of the problems you've talked about in your book, there's nothing new under the sun, but you've kind of taken these deeply spiritual, religious concepts and put it into a framework to help guide business leaders, where it's, I feel like your book is about the emerging leader, but it's really in essence about the emerging person, right? Mm-hmm. And you even talk about this in the integration side of the book. Maybe you can mention this, where it's not just about who you are in business profession, but who you are as a person at home and everything. Why is that important?
Well, you got to be the same person at work, at home, in your family life, in your personal life, and in your community. And if you can do that, that's living your life with integrity. And integrity comes to the world integral, which the French word is core or cœur, and that's the heart. And today, I think we leaders looking for leaders that lead with their heart, not just their heads. So it's not about the smartest person in the room. It's about who has the heart for real leadership, and that's what it's all about today. So
absolutely.
Close.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, we really appreciate you spending some, this much time with us. So to close up, we're going to keep you on for an extra 5-ish minutes. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And I know I'm pushing it here. Your PR team's going to be like, you're not going back on that show, but we're going to do some rapid fire questions. So you get to take as long as you want to answer these questions. We're going to do 3 of them. Okay.
Okay.
So question number 1 for you. And you can't say your book, by the way. Don't worry, I've recommended it. So the people on my show, they'll buy this book. What's a book that you have gifted and you feel like you've recommended most often? What is it and why?
Well, it used to be Warren Bennis's On Becoming a Leader. I would say today it's David Brooks's A Road to Character. Now, people talk about this book called The Second Mountain, but A Road to Character really says leadership is character. And if you can get it right, and he's got a whole series of things he talks about what it means to have character. So I would say that's a great book for anyone to read.
Perfect. Question number 2 of 3. On the road of becoming an emerging leader and self-actualizing, again, we spent like a solid 45 minutes or so just on crucibles, right? And pain. And so along that way, we have mentors and people who deeply care about us and know us well, who are going to tell us things that are deeply painful. But if we listen, take action, it'll change our lives. What was the most painful thing somebody ever told you that made you change for the better?
Wow, that is a tough one. I think I mentioned it to you back in college when some seniors pulled me aside and said, no one's ever going to want to work with you, much less be led by you, because it's like you're building a resume instead of a life. And I had to really back off and realize that I really had to build relationships. And it was very painful to hear at the time, because I thought I could build a great resume and everyone would be impressed and serve on all these organizations and get to be president of this and head of that. And it wasn't about that at all. It was about, and what do I look back on? What I still cherish today is a relationship with those same people. It's all about, so leadership is all about relationship. But I can tell you at the time, it was pretty painful. It caused me to go through into a whole period of about 9 months of reflection. That's unusual. And figure out who I was, because I realized I wasn't who I thought I was. And that was
Got
painful.
it. Yeah. All right. Last question, Bill. And again, we really appreciate you spending so much time with us. This podcast is like your book. This podcast will be one that many of my audience will re-listen to and study, because I know them. I have the smartest audience in the MedTech world. So my last question to you is, I want you to pretend that for the next year, I'm going to take out not only a billboard, right, but because we have these smartphones, a notification. So every day, the people who you wrote this book for, the type of person you wrote this book for, young professionals, leaders, and so forth, every morning they're going to wake up and see this one notification on their phone with a message. And every day that they get in their car and drive to work, they're going to see this big billboard with one message on it. What message do you put on that billboard and notification, and why?
Be who you are and follow your true north. You can do that every day. You're going to have some bad days out there. Not every day is going to be a good day, I assure you. But if you can stay true to your true north and hold within yourself, like I told you when I was getting beaten up by a boss, if I can stay true to who I am in spite of that, it's going to be okay at the end of the day, because I look back on that and say, I stayed on track of who I am.
Fantastic. Wonderful way to wrap up. Bill, stay on for a moment. We'll chat. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Again, I want to encourage you, check the show notes below. Go buy Bill George and Zach Clayton's True North, the Emerging Leader Edition. Remember, this is not a book to be read. It's to be studied. I don't care if you don't have time right now or not. Buy the book, put it on your bookshelf, and get to it right away. And I'm going to also leave in the show notes Bill's LinkedIn. He has fantastic posts. Love his articles. So give Bill a follow and make sure to leave a comment, because I know he's active on there. Bill, thank you so much for joining the show. And thank you all. We'll see you all next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of The State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has an executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.